Hey gang, yesterday at Smerconish.com, the survey question of the day, 3,868 votes cast. On balance, do the protests to date help or hurt President Trump's re-election? This was a decided result. The question could not have been more timely, both for yesterday and for today, although I've switched up today's question. Two-thirds, literally 67% said hurt. On balance, do the protests to date help or hurt President Trump's re-election? Two-thirds of you who voted said hurt. I assume that you watched in real time last night or have seen a recap of that which transpired around the White House, including the president's walk to St. John's Church. I'm doing a Facebook Live in addition to being on POTUS today. And I said, the president walks to church. Was it a photo op or feat of F-E-A-T, feat of strength? I know that area around the White House so well. The White House and its adjacency to Lafayette Square, Lafayette Park, St. John's Church, the Hay Adams. It's the neighborhood where I prefer to stay when I'm in Washington, D.C. The restaurant where I like to sit at the bar if I'm solo and eat dinner is a block away. There's a cigar lounge 2 blocks in another direction. So as I was watching the events unfold yesterday, of course, I was watching with the interest that any of you would have, but I was also watching with a pretty keen understanding of the lay of the land. In the 5 o'clock hour yesterday, or maybe I should say by the 5 o'clock hour yesterday, protesters had assembled in Lafayette Square across from the White House. There was a very heavy law enforcement presence. To my eye, they were from various branches of the federal government. You had Secret Service there, you had National Guard there, you had D.C. police there. It was a whole composite of law enforcement across the federal spectrum. And tensions seemed to be building during the course of the 5 o'clock hour. Remember, there was a curfew that was kicking in D.C. last night at 7 p.m., and then the first thing that struck me as an oddity was, the whole situation is unusual, but the real oddity was to see Attorney General Bill Barr, tieless, wearing a sport coat, standing outside the White House gate, surrounded by a phalanx of staff of the Attorney General's office, presumably, and security. So he was there, and then the announcement came that the president would speak from the Rose Garden. Initially, they said 6:15 p.m., then it was pushed back to 6:30, and the first reaction that I had, knowledgeable of the area, was that even though the protesters had been on the opposite side of Lafayette Square, I said to myself, they're chanting Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and I can't breathe and so forth. The first reaction that I had was that this would all be audible when the president would walk out into the Rose Garden to make his remarks. I think that people who don't visit the White House, people who don't know the surrounding area, might not realize just how compact it all is. I can remember driving down Pennsylvania Avenue as late as college or law school. It's hard to fathom that now because, of course, you can't drive up to the White House, but you can walk up to the White House. And maybe the point that I'm making about this being, a compact area within a major city is to remind everybody that LBJ, it drove him nuts that he would be in the White House and able to hear protesters out front chanting, LBJ, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? I think that was the refrain in the Vietnam era. So my first thought was that the president and the press in the Rose Garden would not be immune to what was going on outside the White House, that they were going to hear this. And then came the surprise that police began moving on what had been peaceful protesters and driving them out of Lafayette Square and the surrounding area. And immediately I realized what was happening, that this was all being choreographed by the president, that the reality show star was now directing an episode, and that he was setting up a situation where he would speak at precisely, I have to say this, my first reaction, I didn't catch on. My first reaction was, I wonder if the disturbance in Lafayette Square will delay the presser. The presser had already been set for 6:15, then they pushed it back to 6:30, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, maybe this will delay it because now you've got a skirmish in front of the White House. And then I caught myself and I said, wait a minute. I didn't remember for a moment who I'm dealing with. This is a reality star who wants to choreograph a split screen image. I sent out a tweet in the midst of all of this, and I said, make no mistake, he wanted this split screen. He timed it this way. Like 5,000 people responded to the tweet, which I don't think I've ever had 5,000 people react to a specific tweet of mine before. So the president now comes out in the Rose Garden, and I'm watching on CNN, and I'm clicking back and forth with Fox and MSN to see how they're all playing it. He delivers his tough on crime speech, and then he sets up the finale for last night's episode, or maybe it was last night's season, when he said, now I'm going to pay my respects to a special place. And I wondered, where is he going? And of course, with that, the president now walks with aides through a cleared out Lafayette Square, goes over to St. John's Church, now accompanied by the aforementioned Bill Barr, where he raises a Bible and stood with aides, by the way, all of them white. I just can't. Today's a day where it's, Blackout Tuesday on Instagram. If you look at my account and everybody else's, it was just so tone deaf to not have anyone of color. If you're gonna do the stunt, at least do it right. And doing it right would have been standing at the church, at least with some folks of color. So he raises the Bible, and then I continue to watch the coverage, and I'm clicking around, and I see that on Fox, Martha McCallum had the Reverend Robert Fisher. This is his church. St. John's is where he hangs his hat. He seemed pleased by the president paying respect at the church. The church had been the site of a fire on Sunday night. He said that he'd had no idea and that it seemed like a surreal moment. I was thinking to myself, did Fox know? Did Fox know that the president was going to be there, and therefore did they book the Reverend so that he'd be on their set at a time when the president was there? But Martha McCallum said they didn't have any idea. Interestingly, then later at night on Anderson Cooper, the bishop spoke up. Marianne Edgar Budd said, I just can't believe what my eyes have seen tonight. She said that the president had abused sacred symbols and that she was outraged that St. John's had been used for political purposes. Anyway, then the president, when he finishes at St. John's, walks or leisurely strolls back to the White House. I think it's probable that one of the motivations that he had is that he was upset with reports that on last Friday night, he'd spent an hour or so in an underground bunker in the front yard, beneath the front yard of the White House, because of the unrest in Lafayette Square. Anyway, the point is that the visit sparked enormous reaction. And the print edition of the New York Times early edition, which I happen to have in my hands, is one that has really caused people to be upset. It says, as chaos spreads, Trump vows to end it now. The story, as Brian Stelter pointed out in his newsletter, was pretty hard-hitting. Katie Rogers, Jonathan Martin, and Maggie Haberman wrote the story. Quote, as the president began speaking, the police used tear gas and flash grenades to clear out the crowd that had gathered across the street in Lafayette Square so that after he was done, Mr. Trump could walk to the boarded-up St. John's Episcopal Church, the so-called Church of Presidents, and pose for photographs in front of it while holding a Bible. It was the print headline that drew criticism, so much so that David Boardman, who I know, he's the dean of the Klein College of Media and Communications at Temple University, said, quote, I'm not among those who love bashing the New York Times, which I consider our frontline defense against tyranny, but this headline is stunningly bad and totally missing what may be the most chilling day of the Trump presidency. Well, as I came on air, the electronic headline for the New York Times was different. Trump threatens force, police and protesters are injured. And then the main story, upper left corner of the homepage, was this: peaceful rally dispersed with tear gas so president can pose at church. The debate over the staging of that event last night became really the main story and has overshadowed just how violent a night it was. The Daily Mail has a good summary today, and I posted local links at smerconish.com to each of the stories that I'm now referencing. 4 cops shot in St. Louis last night as America was gripped by a 7th straight night of destruction in the wake of George Floyd's death. Rioters opened fire, wounded 4 officers in St. Louis while others hurled rocks. Another cop reportedly on life support after he was shot in the head in Las Vegas. In Buffalo, New York, shocking video shows police confronting a group of protesters in the street before a car rammed into officers, etc., etc., etc. Minneapolis, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, the Chicago suburb of Cicero, 2 people fatally shot, at least 60 other were arrested. So the point is this: without saying it expressly, critics of the president are pinning this now all on him. At least that which happened in Washington, D.C. in Lafayette Square last night. But I sense that where the debate is headed is that critics of the president will attempt to attribute all of this lawlessness now to his tone deafness in responding to the situation that brought about George Floyd's death. From the president's perspective, hence the title that I used on Facebook Live today, this is all calibrated to show strength, that lawlessness will not be tolerated. So everybody's appeasing their base, is my point. And meanwhile, as the violent protesting, not the non-violent protesting, but the violent protesting continues, think about who is most impacted. There's a link on my website today to a story in the Philadelphia Inquirer by Maria Panaritis, that if there's one thing, and I can't do anything about the paywall, but if there's one story that I want you to read today, it's the story in the Inquirer of Jeff Brown. Jeff Brown is an entrepreneur who runs 6 supermarkets in low-income neighborhoods in Philadelphia that used to be food deserts. And Maria Panaritis visited 2 of his stores that were looted. She visited yesterday. Those 2 stores employ 600 people in solid union jobs, 95% of them African-American from the neighborhood. So here's an entrepreneur, by the way, who I believe in President Obama's first State of the Union address was singled out by the president as he sat with First Lady Michelle Obama. So this is someone who's received a lot of deserved favorable treatment because of his willingness to provide food in minority communities that were previously underserved. His stores are so important that Governor Tom Wolf and the police commissioner in Philadelphia, Danielle Outlaw, both toured at least one of his stores yesterday. One of them, the Parkside store, was trashed on its 13th anniversary. So in Maria Panaritis' story, she says, "This was Brown's desperate message to me after I'd walked through the devastated interiors of the phenomenal supermarkets he built and runs in low-income neighborhoods that used to be food deserts. The scene inside his Fox Street and Parkside stores, I saw them both, was staggering. Computerized machinery broken, food in piles on the floors everywhere, lines of cars outside pulling up to shop only to be turned away one after the other." And then she goes on to tell some of the background about the business and just the impact that this is now going to have on those who can most ill afford to have further disruption of their lives. Brown's stores are an oasis. Yeah, this says it well. Brown's stores are an oasis for the very people most affected by these injustices day in and day out. They feed people in zip codes abandoned by other food chains for years. Parkside opened to much celebration 13 years ago on Sunday. It was trashed on its anniversary. The 2 looted stores employ 600 people in solid union jobs, a rarity in the grocery business anymore. They are among 6 urban stores Brown runs in the area. Even formerly incarcerated individuals are among the workers in whom Brown has placed his money and his trust. This is my point, I speak so often about the impact of the partisan divide, how each side fights to their personal advantage and let the rest of us be damned. Nothing gets done in the meantime. Gridlock sets in and compromise becomes a dirty word. I don't want to hit you with my usual pitch about how polarization has driven this country into a ditch. It seems almost farcical for me to describe to you the way that it should have gone last night. The way that it should have gone last night would have been a night where the president would have stood with the opposition leadership. If the president's an R, then it would have been with D's or vice versa. That the complement of faces would have been multicultural and representative of the way the country looks, and that there would have been a twofold pitch that would have been made. Pitch number 1 would have been a commitment to bring about justice through the judicial system in connection with the killing of George Floyd. And secondly, that while peaceful protest would be not only permitted but encouraged, that violence and lawlessness and rooting of stores like those supermarkets of Jeff Brown's in Philadelphia would not be tolerated, and that law enforcement, through whatever means were necessary, would control the situation. Because you can do both. You can both protect the memory of George Floyd and bring his perpetrators to some sense of justice, and protect the interests of those who today can't shop in Philadelphia in urban supermarkets on which they'd been reliant up until now. It's both. It's both protect the judicial system and see it through, and also make sure that the violence that now is escalated all across the country doesn't become the narrative. Those are my thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. And for the benefit of those of you who are tuned in on POTUS right now, I know you're already calling me at the usual number, which is 855-486-1776. Today's survey question: should the United States military be deployed to defend life and property amidst current civil unrest? Should the United States military be deployed to defend life and property amidst current civil unrest? For those of you tuned in on POTUS, call me now at 855-486-1776. For everybody tuned in to Facebook Live, thank you very much. Hello, Facebook Live. I am now on a very brief commercial break. Hello, Mindy Norris. You agree 100%. Now, why is our POTUS unable to do this? Seems like a no-brainer. Karen, waiting for NATO to come in. Janet, will you vote for Trump? You know, I'm going to make a point without answering your question, which is this. It is only the 2nd of June. I could never have predicted the last 10 days. We have no idea what's about to unfold. This football is going to bounce in so many different directions between now and November. I tell everybody, keep your powder dry and see what develops. Okay, I've got to get on radio. Come listen to me on radio, and thanks for watching. Share this with a friend. See ya.